19. Got it. And in our office, we administer many of the federal programs under the Every Student Succeeds Act. So Title 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, McKinney-Vento. We also provide oversight and support for many of our state requirements, such as district strategic and school renewal planning and accreditation. And as Renina mentioned, prior to joining the State Department, I was a teacher, a coach, an assistant principal, and a principal, all at the high school level for 16 years. I've been married to what I would consider to be the luckiest man alive for almost 16 years, and we have two beautiful daughters, Carly, who is 14 and a ninth grader, and Claire, who is 11 and is a sixth grader. And in my free time, I love to read fiction novels and take naps. And then, of course, during the pandemic, I discovered that I really enjoy some outdoor activities like camping and hiking and kayaking. So that's a little bit about me. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm Elizabeth Supan, and I am a Title III or Multilingual Education Coordinator here at the South Carolina Department of Education, working with Sarah Longshore under the Federal and State Accountability Office. I'm very excited to be here with you today to share some of the great works that we see happening across the state in family engagement. So a little bit more about myself. I have been a teacher for many years. Prior to this role, I was working in Aiken County as the ESOL partner teacher or coach there. And prior to that, I was an ESOL teacher for 4 years. And then, like our presenter shared with us, I was in the classroom for 20 years. So I've been around the block for a little while. I'm very excited to be with you today to learn a little bit more together. I feel, and I consider myself a lifelong learner, so I just really am excited to be part of this learning today through this entire summit. So a little bit about me personally. I'm also married to a very lucky guy, Brian. We've been married for 26 years and we have 2 grown children. Sarah, who is my oldest, and she just got married, and she is will be living with her husband in Germany. They were married this summer in a beautiful setting. The pictures are unreal, not realistic. They look like they're transposed or that she had a backdrop, but they really were real. It was just the 2 of them. Because of the pandemic, but she is now Sarah Supandemic, which we find quite comical, that they met during the pandemic, were married during the pandemic, and we're very excited for her and her husband. He is stationed in Germany in the Army. He's a captain in the Army, and so she is home right now getting all of her paperwork together in order for her to be back with him. And then my son is living his best life in Maine, working on a farm while he figures out what he wants to do with the rest of his life. And like Sarah, we are outdoor enthusiasts. My son went to the world-class kayak academy for his senior year of high school. And to say the least, we love whitewater rafting and kayaking as a family. When we're not doing that as a family, my daughter and I are in Disney quite often. I know that I have some friends here that have joined us, and so I think all of this attests to what you know about me. I'm known as the Disney person. So if you ever need any advice for Disney, please don't hesitate to reach out. So yeah, very excited to be here, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for a while and mute myself, but I will be moderating the chat while Sarah talks, and we'll go back and forth. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So next slide, please. Why are we here this morning? Multilingual learners, and that's what we use now instead of English learners. English learners is not incorrect, but we do tend to use multilingual learner a little bit more often now. We know that they bring very diverse cultural identities and new perspectives to our classrooms and communities. But we also know, without a doubt, that authentic family partnerships can foster language development and increase student achievement. So during our time together, our main goal is going to be to equip you not only with some knowledge and supports that you can use to help build partnerships with families, but also with some very practical activities and resources that you can take back with you to continue this good work that we know you're doing. So a little bit of theory and research, but also trying to make it as pragmatic as possible. So our goals and objectives for today's sessions for today's session will include the following. We're going to take a look at how the multilingual learner population has increased in our state over recent years. We'll examine the ideas of involvement, engagement, and partnership, and then how these three concepts are related, and then yet how they are also different. And finally, we will explore ideas for partnering with parents and families and share some examples from the field that you may or may not have considered before today. We'll make sure that you're aware of several tools and resources that could be helpful to you with this work. So let's start with a little bit about how this particular population has grown over recent years. There has been a significant increase in the number of MLs in South Carolina's public schools. While the population still remains small, it is growing. From 2000 to 2014, believe it or not, South Carolina had one of the sharpest increases in its ML population in the nation. So by 2015, the percentage of public school students who were identified as MLs in South Carolina had reached 5.6%. This is up from 0.8% in 2000. And that percentage continues to rise. In 2019-20, just 2 years ago, MLs made up 6.3% of South Carolina's total student population. Now keep in mind, okay, while 6.3% may not seem like a lot, you have to keep in mind that that growth has not been uniform throughout our state. Some districts have seen numbers closer to or even exceeding 30%. While Spanish is the primary language that's spoken by all of our MLs, we certainly know that it's not the only language spoken, but it is the home language of approximately 77% of all MLs nationally. So it is the most commonly spoken language other than English in our country. Again, we know that they don't all speak Spanish. There are other languages. So the other top 4 languages spoken in South Carolina, besides English and Spanish, are Korean, Japanese, Chinese, and Arabic. Now, we know that the majority of our MLs speak Spanish in South Carolina. So for that reason, the remainder of this presentation, we're really going to try and zero in on Spanish speaking students and their Latinx families. So that's sort of the focus for the remainder of this presentation. Just to provide you with a little bit of additional context and to give you some points for comparison, in 2000 or from 2003, 2004, which was actually my first year in the classroom, so that tells you my age, to 1819, which was a span of 15 years and really not so long ago, the number of white students in our state increased by only 4%. The number of Black students decreased by 10%, while the number of Latinx students increased by 72%. So as educators, as leaders, we must be the first to recognize, right, that these changes are happening, and we have to adjust accordingly to meet the needs of all of our students and families. 15 or 20 years ago, our schools looked quite different than they do today, so we have to be very mindful of this shift. So now you might be wondering, why have we seen such a dramatic increase in the number of MLs and Latinxs in South Carolina? Well, there are 6 southern states that are now being referred to by many researchers in the field as the new Latino South, and South Carolina is one of those 6 states. Those 6 southern states have experienced very fast growth rates of the Latinx population since 2000. So a lower cost of living, new job opportunities, especially for migrant farming, construction, service jobs. All of that makes it a very appealing destination for many immigrant and migrant families. So there's this idea out there, you might have heard it before, that immigrant Latinx parents might not value education or might not care about the education of their children. But what does the research tell us? Research tells us that immigrant Latinx parents absolutely hold high expectations about the quality of the US school system and the opportunities that it's going to afford their children. So do they care? Absolutely. Yes, they value education and they see it as a tool for advancement for their students, for their children. Immigrant parents want their children to have a better chance to do better than what they have done and to have opportunities for better jobs. But oftentimes it really involves making some great sacrifices, including working multiple, sometimes low wage or oftentimes low wage, physically demanding jobs. And as newcomers in the United States, they have to acquire new understandings of the world around them, right? They have to learn how to navigate new systems and to acquire new forms of cultural and social capital, such as learning the English language. And so these tasks make adapting to their new life very emotionally stressful and physically challenging. So this population, we know that they are especially vulnerable. And that means that as educators, we have to make more of the effort to establish partnerships with them. The burden is really on us to make sure that that happens. Despite the considerable challenges that have been experienced by many of these families, our immigrant Latinx families, we also know that they're very likely to possess strengths that can help their children be successful in school, such as strong resilience and psychological flexibility. Latinx families tend to value and emphasize the family, right, and togetherness. So family obligations, warmth, reciprocity, secure connections with others. And so this provides our MLs with a very extensive support system consisting of extended family and friends. So we know that parent engagement is important, but guess what? I don't know if you knew this or not, but research tells us that parent engagement has a more significant impact on the increased achievement of Latinxes than it does on any other racial group. So it's super important. All right, I'm going to pause there and take just a quick break, see if you have any questions, if there's any in the chat. I also, I don't know how Renina or Elizabeth feel about this. I certainly don't mind if you want to unmute yourself and just ask your question or make a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, we don't have anything in the chat, but we've thrown a lot of information at them in a very quick time. So let's see if we have any questions come in. And again, feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video if you're curious and want to do that.
Maybe I'm just curious. I'll move on with the presentation, but I really am kind of curious about who is attending this presentation this morning, what your ML percentages look like in the school or district where you are from. Is this 2% or do you have more like 20% of MLs in your school or district? I'm really just kind of curious about that. So if you're not shy, please drop that into the chat. And I'm just curious. 34%. That's a big number. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to feel free to keep the chat going. It doesn't bother me at all, but I'll keep going on with the presentation. So Elizabeth, if you will advance me to the next slide. All right, so what is it? Okay, so what are we talking about exactly? There is this pretty much a general lack of agreement, right, on what the goal of parent engagement is or how it's even defined. So to illustrate, I just want you to look at these terms on the screen and just consider the array of terms and definitions that exist to describe this idea. So we've got parent involvement, homeschool collaboration, parent engagement, family engagement, parent participation, homeschool partnerships, right? That's just to name a few. So what is it that we're really going for? So the most common understandings applies to a very narrow definition. And this definition is involvement. It really places the responsibility on the parents or the family. The term parent involvement is typically synonymous with, think of it as school activities and practices that are really designed to just involve the parents, or better yet, to keep them busy in support of the school and its daily tasks that are defined by the school and its leadership. So the idea of parent involvement, it most often implies the need for families to help the school or the district reach its goals that reflects its values and priorities, right? So parents are encouraged to attend school activities, be present at conferences, participate in fundraising, give their signatures, be visible, volunteer, chaperone, et cetera, serve on committees. And so it therefore can be relegated to a pretty scripted role for parents to perform. It's very passive and can be one way. And so it's very problematic for families of diverse backgrounds who are often frankly uncharacterized as being uninvolved, but really it's for no other reason than just their inability to adhere to that script, right? Another common understanding takes into account all the behaviors that take place both inside and outside of the school. So while involvement is most often used to describe the specific things that the parents are doing, engagement includes not only what they are doing, but also their understandings of the world and how their involvement practices are embedded in their own homes. So Latinx parents tend to define engagement practices much more broadly than others do. So Latinx immigrant parents, they often cite activities that occur outside of the school. When you ask them how they're engaged in their child's schooling, they're going to say things like helping with homework, giving advice, providing emotional support, having school-related discussions at home. So it's much more broad. They might not show up to the school very often. You might not see them. They might not be adhering to that script, but they're still engaged. And now finally, partnership. This is really the goal. And we did hear Dr. Pulowski speak about this morning and how it's important for, especially when she was talking about communication, right? It being two-way. Partnership is often understood as individuals sharing a purpose, mutual respect, and the willingness to negotiate, as well as the exchange of knowledge and making decisions together. So although teachers and parents are equal partners, or should be equal partners in a child's education, the teachers are typically more responsible for the curriculum, well, obviously, and then the parents complement them by providing additional knowledge about the children. So homeschool partnerships can be defined as, and I'm not going to read those just for time's sake. I'm going to keep this train rolling, but you'll have access to this presentation. So there we have it. Homeschool partnerships is where we're really trying to go. So the responsibility of building and maintaining a successful homeschool partnership, it does lie primarily with the teacher. As we said, particularly when it comes to immigrant Latinx families, they're a very vulnerable population. It's our responsibility. And when I say our, it really kind of funnels down to the teacher in the classroom. But for no fault of their own, sometimes teachers are just inexperienced or they've received limited preparation. Very few are bilingual, so they're often unsure about how to go about this. But keep in mind that an essential aspect of Latinx culture is relationships and this strong sense of belonging to a group in which there are shared obligations and responsibilities. So we really have to work. If you're a school or district leader listening to this presentation, we've got to help our teachers build on those relationships that ML parents are going to foster, really help to build that two-way communication and build those strong partnerships. And when parents are full partners, it means that their expectations and that their knowledge of the child is part of the dialogue. If you would, please answer in the chat, and we'll take another quick break. What barriers currently exist in your school or district or that you've seen that may be preventing authentic homeschool partnerships with the families of your multilingual learners? I'll pause for just a moment and let you respond to that question.
Yeah, I like that this morning, Dr. Pulowski was actually talking a lot about barriers. And as we're talking about our multilingual learners, one of our large barriers already coming in the chat is language. Language. Is a barrier. So we're going to give you some practical tips of how to try to lower that barrier, reduce that barrier.
COVID, political fear, language, time.
Oh gosh, time, definitely time.
Education level, literacy.
Virtual being the only way to communicate now is sometimes difficult, but hopefully we're going to provide you with some ways to do that.
Oh, and there's a good one. Honestly, I would say in many instances, effort on our part.
That's true.
Internet connectivity, technology literacy. Yeah. All right. Very helpful. So, Elizabeth, if you'll advance the slide, as you can see, here are some examples of barriers to homeschool partnerships. And you guys have said most all of these already. We know that our ML parents, they face considerable and unique obstacles to becoming involved in the more traditional ways. They, as we mentioned earlier, thinking not about involvement, but more about engagement, they're primarily engaged in the children's education at home and out of the school's view. So one of the most frequently cited barriers, and I saw this pop up in the chat, many times, is difficulty with language acquisition on both parties, right? Very few South Carolina educators are bilingual. And so not only does language prevent parents and school staff from being able to communicate essential information, but parents sometimes may actually be afraid of being perceived as being incompetent or uneducated simply because they don't know the English language yet. So parents, our Latinx parents, they may feel intimidated, or they might experience stress and anxiety. And I heard Dr. Pulowski talk about that as well, the stress that any of us feel going into a parent-teacher conference, but imagining how it feels when you don't know the language and are new to the culture. There are also many other significant cultural differences, especially individualistic versus collectivism. Big changes there where the American culture, we're typically more about, we really value personal achievement, self-expression, independence, right? And it's different than many of our Latinx families have grown up experiencing. So in contrast, there are some barriers there for sure, but we just have to remember that some of what our common involvement strategies or engagement strategies have been, sometimes they're not the best strategies to work with our Latinx families. We know that instead it may only serve to alienate our marginalized parents who are already feeling disconnected from the school. Now, all this sounds really great, doesn't it, so far? But I'm sure that you're wondering about, okay, now how do we do it? And we promise we're going to get there. If you're anything like us, we know that you're invested in wanting to build programs and building capacity in your schools and districts so that you can have these authentic partnerships with communities and families. Otherwise, you wouldn't have chosen our session, right? But typically we go back to, well, how do we do this without some sort of funding? This all does come back to money. But fortunately, your federal funds can help, particularly Title I and Title III. It's just important to remember, though, that communicating meaningfully with parents is actually a civil rights responsibility. So in the absence of any federal funding, schools and districts are still obligated there. So it must first be addressed using local or state dollars, but then your Title I and Title III funds can be used to supplement, just not supplant, any local, state, or other federal money that would have otherwise been spent for this purpose. And of course, as always, when you're thinking about building your federal funding plans, you want to think about your return on investment. When you focus on family partnerships, really imagine what the outcome is going to be and if there is a true return on investment for the dollars spent. We know there's lots of questions about allowable use of funding. This could be another session in and of itself, just talking about allowable use of Title I and Title III dollars. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it, other than to say that if you have questions or if you'd like to talk through any various scenarios with us, give us a call. We stand ready to assist. All right, Elizabeth.
There we go. So now we're going to take just one quick little break to see if there's anything you want to that's pressing in the chat, or if you just need to have a little bit of a stretch break before we continue, trying to give you some practical ways that you can actively build partnerships with your multilingual learner families. In the chat, I was noticing some information about how it is very difficult to for our teachers to engage with our multilingual learner families. So hopefully in the next half of our presentation today, we're going to give you some ways that you can lower those barriers and break through. Unless there's any pressing question at this point, I think I will continue. Sarah, if you'll just kind of moderate the chat and see if there's any way. I don't mind being interrupted if pressing questions come in as we continue. So we're going to talk a little bit about the dual capacity building framework. We learned this morning a lot about some great research behind family engagement, and one of the leading members of this research is Dr. Karen Mapp. Some of you might be familiar with her work. She is responsible for building this dual capacity building framework and the work behind that with the U.S. Department of Ed. And we're going to watch just a 3-minute video that's going to kind of explain to you in a lot quicker and more efficient way than we could in our talking. So if you'll just indulge us for a minute for a quick little video from one of the leading researchers in parent and family engagement, Dr. Karen Mapp. It starts off silent, so we think we can't hear it, but you should be able to hear it in just a minute.
I believe it was in the
Are we
spring of
good?
2010. Secretary Duncan actually came to the Ed School, and I had an opportunity to ask him a question about the federal support for family and community engagement. And he very wisely then turned the work back to me and said, you know, Karen, we really would appreciate some help in that area because we're not quite sure that we are doing the right thing. So with the help of some of my colleagues, I went to Washington as a consultant, and one of the things that we helped the USDOE develop was the dual capacity framework for family school partnerships. So what we thought we would do with the framework was to try to really focus in on this concept of capacity. So the main problem in terms of developing effective family school partnerships is that none of the stakeholders have really had any good guidance in how to do that. There's been limited capacity there. Many districts now are starting to do things like parent universities and parent academies and parent workshops, but they're not providing that same type of development and support for their staff. So that really defines the problem. The second section of the framework, I think, is the most important part because that tells you what have we learned about promising high-impact strategies to help do really good work around building partnerships between home and school. So there are process conditions that we've defined. Those are sort of the nuts and bolts of what we think are the key pieces to any really effective partnership intervention. And then there's the organizational conditions, and that's sort of the infrastructure that the organization, say the district, has to provide in order to keep the work going. Then we talk about capacity. What are our goals? What are our program and policy goals around this work? So this is really where you want to see growth when it comes to your purpose for your family and community engagement partnerships. And so Monica Higgins, who's one of our faculty here, actually helped me think about these 4 C's that you see listed. These are the areas that you really want to see people learn and grow, so capabilities, their connections, their cognition, and their confidence. These are the things that you see grow in the adults when we actually have interventions that are set up properly. And so finally what we hope will happen is now we will have staff that are very skilled at partnering with families. They know how to be welcoming to parents. They know how to honor parents' knowledge, because that's also a big problem sometimes, that schools and districts don't understand that their families and their communities have a wealth of knowledge that will help them with their pedagogy. And then on the side of the families, we now have families who can participate in multiple roles. So they can be encouragers of their children's learning. They can be monitors of time. And then maybe some of them, because not all of them can do it because they may work 2 or 3 jobs, can come and participate in decision making and other things. So we're really hoping that the framework sets down some of those foundational pieces that actually will help districts and schools and other organizations build effective partnership programs and understand the kinds of strategies that they have to put in place to do that work well.
Right. So as we listened to her, we're talking about how we actually build that capacity among your staff in your districts, with your teachers, with everybody, all of the stakeholders that are involved with building this partnership. We want to build their confidence in order for them to be able to do that. So that's the first step, is building that confidence. So I'm going to share with you some of the examples in the field that I have come across in this role that I've been in with the South Carolina Department of Education, and learning about some great examples of true partnerships out there in the field. So I want to bring your attention to the top image over here with the water and the soda. When we think about bringing families in for those events, but also wanting to build that partnership, we want to lower that stress level for our families. Look at how simple that particular image is in order to bring the families in. We know that food does bring them in. Be careful with how you word that necessarily, but when you are putting a sign up, look at how simple that is in order to lower lower the stress level for our families that might be multilingual learners themselves, or even families with low literacy. By simplifying your images and your wording, even just in your signage, that's going to reduce the stress and allow parents and families to feel like they're welcome and don't have to worry about the stresses. Then the next thing is to honor their cultures, honor their backgrounds, build their partnerships with them in order to learn more about them as people. The whole idea of building partnerships is really just valuing each other as people and honoring everything that you bring to the table. How often are we with our multilingual learner families trying to explain access testing, which is the annual ELP assessment, English language proficiency assessment that our students take, our multilingual learners take every year. This is a great example from Horry County. I think we have some members of Horry County here in the house that shows how even during COVID, they created a slide that was both in English and in Spanish that explained access testing, the test results back for families, rather than just doing the piece of compliance, which is the responsibility of us sending home the scores in a language the parent understands. This is actually building more, not just sharing the scores, but explaining what those scores mean and what we want to do with our students this school year. So finding ways to build that in the way that you bring parents to the table is very important. Now, this particular slide is one of my favorites to share because it shows how easy it is to build that real true relationship with families. We heard this morning, a couple of people were mentioning different ways that we can communicate with families, and Parent Square was actually one that was new to me, so I added it to this slide very quickly. But we want to empower our families to be true partners, and these images are actually from a colleague of mine who one of her practices is for her to text her families. Now, I know some of us are concerned with texting families because you want to keep your privacy to yourself, but these particular apps protect your phone number. Our multilingual learner families use WhatsApp a lot. As a matter of fact, it's the app that I use whenever Sarah is over in Germany. It's a way to communicate without cost and be able to communicate in a language that we understand. So these are definitely features that you can use in order to text, but let me bring you the attention to the text itself. This particular teacher, ESOL teacher in Aiken County, actually happens to be bilingual, but she doesn't use that because she wants to build the English language, obviously, with her multilingual learner families. So what she does is she sends a text with a photo and an emoji. And how quick is that in order for her just to take a little snapshot while the students are there, send a little picture with the emoji. This first picture, the celebration picture, is how he was very excited about how he did on a particular test in his classroom. So the celebration emojis are there. But this one, they were learning about plants, and she put the emojis of the plants within the picture and in the text. So let me tell you what that looks like at the home. So as Dr. Longshore was explaining at the beginning, that you have all of this involvement with the family at home that you might not see. What's happening around their dining room table or their kitchen table or even in their living room, they're looking at these texts together and they're engaged in conversations, right? And so how often do we go home and we're sitting with our families at night? I know it was true for me when my kids were growing up, and you would ask the question, what did you do in school today? What did we hear? But if I had received a text like this, I would have known exactly how to have a conversation with my child about what happened in school that day. And let's take a look at this one with the plants, for example. What if that particular child is from one of our families that might be part of the migratory program where they are heavily embedded in agriculture? She learned about plants in the classroom, but if she goes home and then has a conversation with her family about plants, all of the extra knowledge that she's going to gain within that conversation with the family she could then bring back to the classroom the next day and share her knowledge about what she knows about plants based on what her family they were able to discuss. So how wonderful would that be for that student? So we just wanted to share with you some simple ways that you can actually engage families from the get-go. building those partnerships, building those relationships. We talk a lot at the beginning of the school year about how we want to build relationships with our students, and we encourage our teachers to do that. But in doing that building of the relationships with your students, you really need to embed building relationships with your families as well. So we're going to take a minute or two more just to see if you have any questions, or maybe you have some suggestions about other resources that are out there. I've picked up on the Parent Square as another option for communicating with families, but maybe you have some suggestions to share with everybody here with other apps that might be out there for you to be able to share and communicate with families. So let's take a minute to see if we have some more suggestions.
It looks like another one is Class Dojo. Was another suggestion in the chat.
Yeah, and it does translate the message. What I love is that more and more of these apps that we are familiar with and are using are beginning to use more ability for translating. I actually stumbled upon something yesterday that was very exciting. We use Microsoft Teams, and I know a lot of districts do that as well. If you share a PowerPoint within Microsoft Teams and you actually share the presentation from the online version, you can have that translated immediately on their end. Like they can toggle over and change the language to the language that they understand. It's really exciting that we are having more and more opportunities for that to happen for our families.
Elizabeth, also, I know you said Parent Square, but also in the first session, Write by Text was one of the apps.
Yes, thank you. I need to add that one to my slide as well. Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm just really encouraged by the fact that more technology is out there for our families that will help with building these partnerships. If we've learned anything during this pandemic, I think we've learned that we can monitor and adjust our ways that we bring in families and bring in that true partnerships, and just realizing that we can be flexible with what that looks like and allow opportunities for parents to be involved in a different way than we ever have before.
Elizabeth, I thought of something else that I wanted to add. I meant to mention this when I was presenting earlier and forgot, but I think it's important also to remember that in many Latinx cultures and communities and countries, it is actually considered disrespectful for a parent to ask a teacher a question. Teachers are very highly regarded, very highly respected. And so many of our parents, particularly those from Mexico, may have been brought up to believe that it is not their role to question the teacher. And so while it may seem like a very reasonable request for us to ask parents to show up for parent-teacher conferences, it may seem like a reasonable request, right? But for some of these families, they're like, no, that's not my job. I'm not the teacher. They're the teacher. I'm not asking questions. I trust them to do their job. And so I say that now because I think it emphasizes the importance of us reaching out. We are the one, we can't wait for them to come to us with questions, because they probably in some, at least maybe most, at least some instances, they're not going to. So finding ways, like I love sending the emojis and the pictures to the parents, just finding ways for us to share with them so that they have conversation starters in their homes, I think is really important. So
I agree. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because actually that was one of the things that that I wanted to make sure that we did point out, because sometimes we want to lower that barrier, right? And in order to do that, you have to understand their culture. And understanding that and knowing that about them is going to be vital with building that true partnership. Okay, so a lot of you saw the Carolina Family Engagement Center as a resource. They're part of this whole collaboration with the summit. This PowerPoint will be shared with you with these clickable links so that you can access these particular agencies we're getting ready to highlight and share with you. Reach out to them. They are true partners in this work of building family engagement and true partnerships with our families. They are there to support with many resources for you in order to help you with your work and building relationships and partnerships with families. The SERV Center, of course, who is also facilitating all of our work here today. It's part of this research-based deployment and dissemination of all of these many years of trying to build policy and improve education. And they are a wealth of information. And what I love about it is that it is research-based. I think we heard this morning in the chat at the very end of her session, one of the questions that came up was, well, what do you do if you have a district or a principal or somebody is not supporting your efforts to build these family partnerships? Provide them with the research. And this is a great place to go in order to share, well, this is the research that supports why I want to build this parent partnerships or family partnerships. And then our particular region is Region 6, the Region 6 Comprehensive Center with their work with the SERV Center is our go-to people for that research. These are some of the extra resources that are available for you for building some great partnerships. The research from Dr. Karen Mapp is highlighted here. If you want to just shoot it on your, I'll leave this up because the QR codes, if you're wanting to take a picture of it, I'll talk about each of these just briefly for you in case you want to be able to quickly get them before the presentation is available to you later on the website. These were just some of the resources that we used in order to build our understanding of what this partnership will look like. So if you are not familiar with Coleraine, Colorado, and of course I'm not pronouncing that the way it needs to be because I cannot roll my R's, but that particular website is invaluable to the work of the ESOL program. And I just encourage you to go and explore that website in depth with the research that's through that website that supports multilingual learners and their families. And then finally, some Title III specific program resources that are available to you. This English Learner Family Toolkit specifically is one that helps you with making decisions about what you want that family engagement and partnership to look like. And it is actually available in several languages as well, so that you can get that out to your families if you're interested. So with that being said, we are up for some Q&A. I think we'll go to the Q&A first before we end our sessions. So see if there's anything that's pressing on your minds and in your hearts about what we talked about today, or questions that you might have for how you build those partnerships within your schools. Let us know in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask us any questions that you may have at this point. I think we have about 4 or 5 more minutes, so I just want to use your time and see if there's anything else that you would like to share with us, or any suggestions that you have for anybody that's here with us.
Elizabeth, there is a question in the chat. What is one event that you can recommend for high schools?
Absolutely.
Great question.
That is a really great question, because as we listened this morning, we talked a lot about how we do want to push this family engagement all the way into high school. One of the best ways that you can do that in high school is giving your families information about your parent portal, or ways that they can have access to monitoring their students' grades. A lot of times, I know as a parent of 2 grown children, I kept that Power School on my phone and checked it constantly for one of my kids. I'm not going to tell you which one. And so knowing how to navigate that parent portal was vital to me. But our families don't know how to necessarily access that, or even that it's available. And so one of the great things that I've seen out there in the field are ways to bring families in to have a night that shares how to use some of that technology. Another great way to involve high school families, or even really a lot of families, is through your registration. So a lot of our districts are moving to online registration, and for our multilingual learner families, that can be very intimidating and not knowing how to navigate that online registration. So having a night that's dedicated to that, or a Saturday morning or an afternoon where you're bringing in some translators to help with helping families with that online registration would be a very invaluable way to involve families with knowing how to navigate some of those things that we take for granted.
That was a great question. Thank you, Dr. Washington.
Mm-hmm. Just going to see if there's anything more here before we kind of close it up here. This is Dr. Sarah Longshore's contact information. I'll let her speak for hers, and then I'll speak for mine.
Sure, you have my contact information there. Email is always a really great way to get in touch with me quickly. I'm always looking at it, but you also have my phone number. Please call anytime you have any questions. Again, Elizabeth is probably more so your person to, you know, when it comes to planning events and, you know, how to support MLs in the classroom, any questions related to ESOL or anything like that. But I do have a lot of working knowledge now of federal programs in general. And so I'm able to guide you to persons who can, if I can't answer the questions for you, folks who can help you determine allowable uses of your federal funds as it supports parent engagement. So please reach out to us if we can be of assistance. Anything we can do to help you, we want to be at the table with you. So please just don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. And this is my contact information as well. I am here for you as a resource to help guide you through some of these, navigate some of the ways that you can bring our multilingual learner families to the table, which is so very important to all of this work that we do. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We're happy to help. So we'll leave it with this. If there's any pressing questions, we'll moderate the chat for a little while longer, but we really just are very happy that you were a part of this conversation today, and hope that you are able to take back a few things to your districts or to your schools in order to build those partnerships with our families. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you need any assistance.
We thank you all for being here this morning. Thanks for choosing our session. We're glad to spend this time with you.
Absolutely. Thanks again.